questions for me? Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Mr. Brokaw. Duration that the drug was effective. And that drug was rejected or withdrawn. I guess this one was withdrawn. And that's actually fine. We think that's, again, the benefits of a science-based process. So in terms of our position, we support that these should come to market, but we think that the science has to lead the way on issues with biologics. So in summary, we think that they're similar but not identical. We think that along with the FDA, the World Health Organization, and the European Medicines Agency. We think that these small differences can have a clinically meaningful effect, and it's important to think very carefully about these as that differentiates them from generics. And we think that the European pathway or the European approval system is science-based, it protects patients, and it supports innovation. And we think that that's an important place to start. So with that, any questions for me? Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Mr. Brokaw.
Questions? Seeing none, there may be when Barry finishes.
Okay.
Maybe for you. Thank you, Jeff.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, members. Pleasure to be here. I'm Barry Brokaw on behalf of Teva Pharmaceuticals USA, which is the world's largest generic pharmaceutical company. We have headquarters in Israel. The company was created in 1901. We have facilities in Europe, Pennsylvania, and California. And if Mr. Harmon and Ms. Harkey were here, I would say they're in Orange County, which is where they are. In Irvine, we have 856 employees in that facility. And I'm glad to be here because I think generic companies afford a great opportunity to provide accessible health care and accessible and affordable biosimilars, biologics. The position I'm representing today is that of Teva, but it's generally shared by all the generic pharmaceutical manufacturers. So I'm speaking for a broader audience in that perspective. At Teva, we have more than 400 FDA-approved products for sale. We produce 1 million units of prescription drugs per day, 30 billion doses per year. 1 out of 4 generic prescriptions in the U.S. is a Teva product, and 1 out of 4 generic prescriptions, 1 out of 4 prescriptions in the U.S. is a generic product. 1 out of 7 is provided by Teva, and we also have branded products as well. The healthcare costs of prescription drugs are differentiated between brand products and generic products. There were $291 billion of sales of drugs in 2008, and generic drugs accounted for $48 billion of those sales. The average price of a prescription drug in 2008 was very interesting as well. A branded product, and we're talking about a 30-day supply, was $137.90. The average cost for a generic product was $35.22. You can see the huge difference here. In 2008, generic drugs account for 69% of prescriptions, but only 16% of the dollars spent. And there's a reason for a generic drug in this country and its availability in this world. And principal to that is safety of generic drugs. Generics have the same active ingredients as their branded counterparts. Generics have the same strength and dosage as a brand counterpart. Generic manufacturing...
Just to clarify, though, that's generics, right? Not
generics.
Biologics.
I'm not talking about biologics, and I'll get to that. We share a lot in common, by the way. Generic manufacturing facilities are inspected by the FDA, and they must meet the same standard as branded products. FDA generic approval process is as vigorous as it is for brands, and more than $2.6 billion generic prescriptions were dispensed in 2008. 7 of the 10 biggest drug manufacturers are generic companies. And what we are seeking is a federal pathway for biologics or biosimilars. The reason for that is the cost of biologics is very high, and they provide a phenomenal product. There's no question about this. Incredible breakthroughs we've seen in cancer and other autoimmune programs due to biologics. But the average annual spending growth from 2000 to 2007 for biologics was 16%, and it was 3.7% for drugs. And in the 1990s, the most expensive cancer drug was Taxol, and the cost of that drug in the 1990s was $4,000 per year. The most expensive cancer drugs today that are sold are biologics. They're very effective, but Avastin for colorectal cancer is $42,960 per course, Mr. Hill. Herceptin for brain cancer is $27,990 per course. Tykerb, which is for breast cancer, is $16,575 per course. And Gemzar for cancer is $2,500 to $5,000 per month. And the cost to federal government is going up because of the wide use of biologics, and we are grateful that they are being used. But the costs are significant. In 2007, the top 6 Medicare Part B drugs were biologics, and that increased from $4.1 billion to $7.3 billion in 1 year alone. That was a 70% increase. So we're seeing those costs continue to escalate. We are seeking a pathway to enter in this field to do what we do for generic drugs in the field of biosimilars or biologics. And there are 3 bills that are moving in Congress right now that will address this issue. There's the Waxman measure and Schumer-Collins that are moving through on addressing a pathway for biologics or biosimilars for the approval. The Eshu-Barton bill, and there's a Senate committee markup that was put together in 2007. And the key elements, we think, to the solution of allowing the availability of biosimilars or biologics is a science-driven pathway. And we think the FDA should have discretion as to what is needed to determine efficacy and safety. We think that pathway ought to be in the law, and we think that will lead to a solid outcome. We think there ought to be a timely resolution of patent disputes and a reasonable period for exclusivity for the products that Amgen and other makers come forth with. We understand the need for a return on investment. That's appropriate, it's prudent, it makes sense. We're all businesses, but we also have to address the affordability issues. We think exclusivity is important, and exclusivity bars the FDA from approving a drug during the exclusivity period. It's more valuable than a patent. And we think that that's an issue that will also be addressed in the federal legislation. The industry, by the way, is talking about a 14-year exclusivity provision. The Eshu-Barton bill has 14.5 years in it. The Waxman measure has 5 years in it. The Senate markup from 2007 has 12 years in it. And determining what the appropriate time for that exclusivity of those patents and the time period that should be allowed for making biosimilars available to the broad public at a substantially reduced cost, we believe, are critical to address. And that will determine whether genetics are going to be available. So we have a chasm that needs to be bridged, and I see opportunity in what the previous speaker just said, because we believe in a scientifically based driven decision in this matter. We think that there should be an appropriate return of investment, as I said, and we think that there should be a period of time for generic biosimilars to be introduced in the marketplace. It's interesting to note that President Obama has also endorsed a pathway for a biosimilar adoption program. He did so this week. So we think that because we represent consumers who need access to these health cares at an affordable price, that the availability of these fabulous drugs through their biosimilar approaches would go far to addressing accessibility and reduced costs in health care. So we thank you for having the opportunity to present testimony today.
Thank you, Mr. Brokaw. Questions? I have a couple. Barry, two actually, in terms of the generic drugs that we see today, what is this? I mean, they're not exactly the same. I mean, the chemical compound is the same, but aren't there other differences in terms of the reaction time or the absorption time or something? I mean, isn't there an ability to frame that in something different?
Generally, they have the same. They all have the same active ingredient as the branded product. They have the same strength and dosage as the branded counterpart. There have been some instances where absorption levels may be a little bit different, but they're generally identical. I mean, they are identical in terms of their active ingredients and their makeup. And they go through the same process in terms of the approval that a branded drug goes through with the FDA.
And in looking at the biologics, is it your expectation that when they are biosimilars that are created from that, that they would be identical as well in that sense, and or is there some flexibility allowance that you think should be part of that?
Well, the outcome is what we're concerned with. The effectiveness is what we're concerned with. The safety, the efficacy, and they, as was expressed earlier, are essentially identical. And the FDA is going to establish that process for the approval.
Are you comfortable with, I guess, the comment was...
Just to be clear, the essentially identical question is for generics, which are common pharmaceuticals or small molecules. I think the nature of the differences and the variation in biologics is widely agreed, I think, by all of us to be orders of magnitude greater variation. Even when you're trying as hard as you can to engineer two products to be the same, they are going to have significant differences, and even very slight differences can have a clinically meaningful effect. And that's really the lesson from Europe, is that these are not generics. And so the discussion of generics, while it is relatively, I think, agreed by all parties, this is an entirely separate discussion. And it has to be, because you don't have the same active substance. You have two different proteins, and we know scientifically that these different proteins can have very different effects in the body.
Do you share that thought, Barry?
Well, Mr. Chairman, what the proponents of the biosimilar pathway are seeking is the pathway to make the case for the efficacy and the identical nature of the product. And we hope the FDA, and we're asking the FDA to establish that process.
Are you comfortable with the European model that Jeff had talked about?
Well, we worked through the FDA model, but it's going to be scientifically driven, and we think that's appropriate. And even in Jeff's examples, there were 6 of 11 that were approved immediately. Others were withdrawn, and they go back to the drawing board and come back again.
And I would just add that I think we do have very common points of view. The company that Mr. Brokaw represents also has engaged with the FDA around their innovative product, Copaxone. And in letters to the FDA, they've expressed the very same language, that small differences can have clinically meaningful effects. So I think we're in a very similar place on this.
Wonderful. No further comments here. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Very interesting. Well, that does bring us to the almost end of the hearing today. And now Mr. Hugh, President and CEO of Bioscience, will talk about the next steps, the California's competitiveness, which is kind of a preview of our committee's next hearing. So that would be great. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's actually been fascinating to sit and listen to the discussion. As a physician, scientist, and now a CEO of a biotech company, it's rare that I get to come out of the laboratory and come out of the clinic and listen to the debate on the critical policy issues and the direction for the biotech industry. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
As mentioned, I'm currently the CEO at Biosciences, which is a small biotech company based in South San Francisco, and I live in your district as well. The company was founded from research from Stanford and UCSF in the 2000 era and incubated in small entities, and now we're a small to mid-sized biotech company in late-stage clinical trials on very difficult to treat breast cancers, ovarian cancers, and brain cancers. And so we are sort of the David in a sea of Goliaths at the moment, a small company of around 20 individuals, but we've made tremendous progress. And at the recent cancer meeting, we presented the plenary session in our breast cancer clinical trial, which showed tremendous survival and disease benefits in a subset of breast cancer patients called triple-negative breast cancer. And so the company has been progressing very nicely. And for our global distribution and marketing of our compound, which is coming in the next year or two, we have merged with a global pharmaceutical company called Sanofi-Aventis. And so we've taken the transition that you've heard today of an academic center, laboratory work coming out into a smaller company, and then eventually into a larger distribution network and pharmaceutical network that allows widespread usage of this drug in a very difficult to treat cancer setting. So I hope through the discussions today the committee has able to understand a bit of the life cycle of our industry. It is complex. It is long, much longer than most other industries, and I think some of the unique characteristics of the biotechnology industry offers challenges as well as opportunities on the policy side for you to help stimulate and maintain the strong position that California has had over the years. Personally, I trained in New York, and about 10 years ago found New York a very difficult place to start biotech companies, and moved out here much like many of the folks that are in the biotechnology sector at the moment. And so have been involved in a number of very successful companies out here and very successful organizations, both as a scientist and now as CEO and board member. So as the committee moves forward in evaluating and guiding the policies to help the competitiveness of California, as a member of the community, I would just offer some final thoughts for your future session. One being that competition does exist and it's coming. Other regions, both nationally and internationally, are being very, very active in trying to understand how to attract and preserve the biotech companies and industry in their own regions. And it's interesting, as a CEO in Silicon Valley, we're asked to go and give advice to other regions and other countries. So New York, Massachusetts, Chicago, they've all asked CEOs such as myself to go and guide them on how to create a California-esque environment in their own regions. And also internationally. More recently, European countries, Asian countries have become very, very active in trying to simulate the San Diego, San Francisco corridor in fostering the biotech industry. So I think we should learn from some of the bold moves that some of the other regions have taken, and also learn from some of the past mistakes that we may have made on the California side to make sure that we could preserve the dominant position going forward. And some of the policies that you've already put in place in terms of educational support, workforce stimulation, I would urge you to continue evaluating those opportunities and continue supporting those, because I think that's sort of the foundation for our industry going forward. Secondly, on the tax side, the net operating loss policies, the single sales factor, those have been very, very important for small and large companies to continue to grow in California. And lastly, I would challenge and ask this committee to be innovative in your policies and your guidance of the biotech industry. California has always been an innovator, not only on the technology side, but also on the policy side. And I think we all have an opportunity at this juncture to continue the innovation on the policy side to help stimulate and continue our position, dominant position, in biotechnology going forward. Thank you for having me.
Very good. Thank you very much. Those are very inspirational comments as to where we have to go and what we need to do in the future to maintain our presence and our success. What I'd like to do, and we'll have some public comment, but on the issue of competitiveness in this building, there are other discussions going on looking at economic stimulus, job creation, and future development of industry in California. And I participated in one of the meetings recently, and the issue came up, and you know, we hear so often anecdotally of why businesses leave, or that this number are going there, and we've lost this number of employees. And what seems to be missing, and what came from this discussion previously, was that there is no real quantitative analysis done as to, you know, why and what factors are involved, where are they going, what were the incentives that brought them there specifically in a quantitative manner to look at the state as a whole. So what I'd like to do is, before the next hearing, is have the industry, whether it's CHI, Biocom and Bay Bio, maybe work together to create maybe a matrix or some methodology to be able to quantify. I mean, obviously, we're talking about science here, so they're in that industry. They should be able to come up with something so that we can look at this industry, and maybe this could be a model to quantify those outcomes and where it's been going, and we can look at that and then address it from a quantitative standpoint rather than anecdotally, which is what we've been doing, I think, in the past. So we'll work with those organizations through my office and maybe put that together so we can assist them and they can assist us in doing that. So thank you very much. Any
Perfect. Thank you.
Comments or questions? Thank you. And now we'll move to the final item, which is public comment. This is an opportunity for anyone to make a comment to the hearing. Yes, ma'am. Please, you can come to the microphone up here, please. You can come. This one up here is the best one, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to comment. My name is Martina Newell-McLaughlin, and I direct the University of California System-Wide Biotech Research and Education Program. So that covers all of the 10 campuses of the University of California, half of them in Northern California, half of them in Southern California. So we're well balanced. And I really would like to reiterate the comments made by Dr. Hugh. I've been invited, especially over the last few months, to give presentations around the world on biotechnology. And it is really amazing to me the degree of funding that's going into other countries, specific regions such as Korea, Singapore, etc., where they are pushing up their percentage of GDP, in some instances up to 4%, focusing on research and development. And they see that return on this to them is the major thing that's going to take them out of the recession. And with our own program, if you look, and you've seen it a number of times today from several presenters, the universities are really one of the main engines of innovation. And in fact, 1 in 3 of the biotech companies that you heard about, 1 in 3 of the biotech companies in California came out of University of California research. 6 of 10 of the top biological drugs in the world have come out of University of California research. And the vast majority of this came from the creativity of our graduate students and postdocs, where you actually had sufficient funds to be able to train these people. They are the entrepreneurs of the future. These are the individuals who are going to help put California back on the leadership map, because really it is in grave danger of losing that lead. We really have to be awful careful about not sitting on our laurels and patting ourselves on the back, because the rest of the world is putting a lot of funds into catching up. And I really think the training component, and many of my colleagues here, Judy Chelstrom from the local biotech program, Jeffrey O'Neill from the community colleges, these are the people who are going to help train the workforce of the future. And I urge you to make sure that whatever you do, that we continue to support these types of training programs, because these are the real entrepreneurs, not those that taught us all about chaos theory over the last few months. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Be sure to participate in the next hearing. It'll be great. So thank you. Any comments of the members? Hearing none. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you to CHI, Bay Bio, and Biocom for your help in making this, I think, a very successful hearing. Until the next time, we're adjourned.